Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to today's information session on continued support for commercial tenants. My name is Rebecca Ganikoch, and I'm a Business Engagement Officer for the City of Whittlesea. Before we kick off, please remember to post any questions you have in the chat box, and they will be addressed at the end of the main presentation. To get the session started, I'd like to now welcome City of Whittlesea Chair Administrator Lydia Wilson to say a few words and introduce our presenter.
Thank you, Rebecca, and can I also warmly welcome everyone to this session. It's really wonderful that we have Judy O'Connell with us today. And before I do the introduction, could I just make a couple of comments? Firstly, on behalf of the City of Whittlesea, I recognise the rich Aboriginal heritage of this country and acknowledge the Wurundjeri Willem clan as the traditional owners of this place. And I'd also like to personally acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. I'm, as Rebecca said, the Chair Administrator at the City of Whittlesea and will be operating in that role through to October 2024. And could I also acknowledge alongside me this afternoon is Administrator Peter Duncan. So welcome, Peter.
Thank you.
But most of all, I need to welcome and also thank Judy O'Connell, who is the Commissioner of the Victorian Small Business Commissioner. It's really wonderful, Judy, to have you along this afternoon.
Thanks very much, Lydia. Great to be here.
So as you would all have no doubt experienced, the COVID-19 pandemic shook the world like no one could have ever imagined or could have planned for. It was really devastating for our community to watch the businesses that we all love to support endure a real roller coaster of lockdowns and also ongoing uncertainty. To assist businesses who were forced to close in an effort to stop the spread of the virus, the Victorian Government launched the Commercial Tenancy Relief Scheme. And this scheme included a 6-month moratorium on evictions, rent payment waiver, deferral, and free mediation for tenants and landlords. To many businesses, this was obviously a real lifeline at a time when livelihoods were really threatened. The scheme has recently ended. That was on the 28th of March of this year. However, the Small Business Commission will continue to support local businesses get back on their feet and thrive once more. And I do also need to note that the City of Whittlesea also wants to continue to support small businesses within our municipality and do as much as we can. So to outline the support that the Victorian Small Business Commission can offer, I'd now like to extend a very warm welcome to Judy O'Connell, and also could I make some formal introductions of Judy. She's obviously, as I said, the Commissioner of the Victorian Small Business Commission. She's a graduate from the University of Melbourne and has enjoyed a long and distinguished career in both national and international roles with the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development and the Federal Public Service. She commenced as a Victorian Small Business Commissioner in 2016, and she is a fantastic advocate for small business and really puts in the time and energy into helping small businesses with issues that directly affect them. She also provides advice to business owners, helping them to understand their rights and responsibilities. So on that note, I'll now hand over to you, Judy, and thank you again for the support that the Victorian Small Business Commission continues to provide to businesses operating within the City of Whittlesea. And much as I won't be able to stay for the full session, and nor will my colleague, Administrator Duncan, we'll really be looking forward to hearing some of the feedback and the outcomes of the session. So thank you again for being with us this afternoon.
Thanks very much, Lydia. And I think it's very beneficial that we have get these presentations out, and it's great to see that Whittlesea are so proactive about making sure their small business commissioners understand things. Now, I am hoping that I have shared my screen. If you can just nod, Lydia, if you can see.
Yes.
Yep,
You
it's
have
on.
shared.
Great. All right. So, so this afternoon I did, as Lydia was saying, I did want to explain a bit about what the Victorian Small Business Commission is. We call it the VSBC. Everyone's got an acronym, and also to advise what happens. As Lydia said, we had the commercial tenancy relief scheme that finished at the end of March. So what happens now? Because as we know, it has been devastating for a lot of businesses, not only the shutdown last year, but the couple of shutdowns, the quick ones that we do have, that we have had recently. And so I did want to talk about, you know, how you can support yourself through this pandemic that is continuing and probably will continue on for a short time yet. So I am going to start this presentation. So really the Small Business Commission is an independent government agency. So really we're there to advocate on behalf of small businesses to make sure that there's a level playing field. Quite often when you're a business and you're dealing with a larger business or a government agency that can be quite bureaucratic, it's tough to navigate through to who to actually talk to, but how to actually resolve disputes. So we're there to help and support you. We advocate on systemic issues. So if there's an issue impacting a lot of small businesses, such as payment terms, we've done a fair bit to make sure that payment terms are that the small businesses get paid within well, it was to start with 30 days, but now it's great to see the Victorian government's actually paying small business suppliers within 10 days. And we've done a fair bit on mental health and making sure that the mental health of small business owners is acknowledged, and that there are supports out there to help you if you do have issues, and I'll talk a bit about that at the end. But our main role is a dispute resolution service, which I'm going to talk a fair bit about. Where we don't have a definition of a small business, so if you think you're small or you think you need our support, then we're there to help you. And most of our activities are actually free or very low cost. So this is, you know, mostly pre-COVID, but with a bit, you know, March starting off with COVID. Last year, we helped over 14,000 small businesses with their inquiries, and a lot of these inquiries, especially pre-COVID, is things like, you know, the landlord won't fix the leaky roof, what can I do about it? I've signed this contract and I don't actually understand what this clause means. And just by talking to us, we're actually able to resolve that disputes. Last year we had nearly 2,800 disputes that we had small business owners that had disputes that they applied for our help with, and we were actually able to resolve those. What normally happens is that we contact both parties, and in about 38% of the time we're actually able to resolve those without needing to go to mediation. Last year we held 630 mediations with an 81% success rate. So once they come to us, we can usually resolve them, and that keeps it out of the court system, which can be very costly and time consuming. So I'll talk a lot about the rent relief and the commercial tenancy rent relief scheme, but we also will help support the resolution of a small business dispute. So any business that has a commercial dispute with another party can come to us and we can try and resolve it. And a lot of the types of disputes we get are over, it might be about you've sold goods or services and haven't been paid for it. And quite often a legalistic letter from us will actually say to the other party, oh, they're fairly serious about that, and they'll end up paying. We've had a lot about undelivered goods or the quality of goods. So, you know, especially in COVID, we had a case where somebody had paid up front for masks, and 2.5 months later was still trying to negotiate receiving those masks, and so we got involved and got the money back for the party because they just weren't ever going to receive them. Another example was that during lockdown, a restaurant decided to get their chairs reupholstered. So the upholsterer reupholstered 30 chairs, 10 of them looked fantastic, and the other 20 looked a bit dodgy, and the upholsterer wouldn't do anything about it. So we got involved and discussed with the upholsterer, and he took those chairs back, and they came back good as new. So they're just the types of sort of disputes where we can help support businesses. So now I wanted to come to the commercial tenancy relief scheme. It finished on the 28th of March this year, and it ran for a whole year. So it started on the 29th of March 2020 and finished this year at the end of March this year. But we're still helping to support both those tenants and landlords who are still struggling with rent relief, and that's through guidance, and also we're providing free mediation still, and I'll talk about what types of support we can provide. So what we're still finding, we're still getting about 50, I think, applications a week, where the landlord and tenant have been negotiating rent relief during that year's period between March and March. So I'm just going to call that the 2020-21 year until the end of March. So a tenant might have, if a tenant has actually written to the landlord and requested rent relief, and the landlord's come back and refused to provide rent relief, or only giving a small amount of rent relief, and so they're still in discussion even though the scheme's finished. We can still help you with mediation to try and facilitate that rent relief. So if you're in that situation, then just go to our website, which is vsbc.vic.gov.au, and there's a blue drop-down banner, and if you click on that, you'll be able to go to the section that will walk you through how to actually lodge an application. So what we are hearing, as I said, you know, there's still a lot of landlords and tenants who haven't come to rent relief negotiations or haven't been able to resolve it within that time period. So we will still provide that free mediation. What I have had happen a few times over the last few days is that the tenant has rung up and said, I understand I can't get rent relief now because the cut-off date of 28th of March has already happened. And that's just not true. You can still be negotiating. So this was a pharmacy who the tenant had requested rent relief from the landlord, and the landlord they were going back and forth, and this happened on the 1st of April actually. The pharmacy rang up and they said, I've had the landlord said that it's over, the rent relief scheme is over, and you've got until 2 o'clock this afternoon to agree on rent relief. Otherwise, you're not entitled to rent relief backdated for that whole year. And they were very worried, and they were going to end up agreeing to a reduced rent relief than what they were really entitled to. And I put them straight and said straight away, no, you can still be negotiating for that rent relief, you know, up until, you know, for another 6 months if need be. There's no cut-off date for actually negotiating that rent relief. What the cut-off date is that you are no longer entitled to rent relief under the scheme from the 1st of April. So if you'd had rent relief of say 50% up until the end of March, then come the start of April, you need to pay 100% rent, and you're not entitled to actually go back under the scheme. You're not entitled to go back and request additional rent relief. So I hope that's clear. I know it can be a bit confusing about these times, but under the scheme, you're entitled to have fair negotiations after the 28th of March in order to reach an agreement on rent owed before the 28th of March 2021. Okay, so what happens after the end of March? We all know that, you know, everyone's been talking about this cliff in the news for months, which is when JobKeeper finished at the end of March and the commercial tenancy relief scheme finished at the end of March. And so all of a sudden, a lot of businesses have found themselves in the situation where they've got to start paying their staff again, and they've not only got to pay full rent, but a lot who have had deferred rent have got to start paying that deferred rent back again. So they're paying more than what they were originally, more rent than what they were paying pre-COVID. And quite often there'll be a rent increase as well, so they might have to pay that rent increase. And a lot of businesses we've found is that, you know, they're still probably, because of the lockdown and COVID, are still not back up to what they were in terms of taking and turnover pre-COVID, and still struggling. So what we're recommending that you really do is have a good look at your finances and work out what you can pay in terms of rent. Please contact an accountant, a business advisor, a mentor. I'm sure Whittlesea Council will be able to put you in touch with the right people about who you can talk to about your cash flow situation, and work out what it's going to look like for the next 6 months. And if you find that, you know, you've done the sums and there's no way you can pay this new rent that you have to pay, then try and negotiate a new rent agreement with your landlord. It will be totally outside the commercial tenancy relief scheme, but you still can try and negotiate that rent relief. And what we suggest is that you talk to your landlord about the situation. The reality is we're finding a lot of landlords are being pragmatic, and that if they've got a really good tenant, so if you've had a great relationship with your landlord, you've been a good payer pre-COVID, then they're probably more likely to accept a reduced rent for a bit longer than have an empty shop with no one in it. So a shop or office or whatever it is. So talk to your landlord about your situation, work out what rent you can afford, make sure you do keep paying that rent, and then work out how long you'll need to continue having rent relief for. We suggest that you show documents showing that you've had a fall in turnover, whether they extracts from your accounting records, your BAS statement, just to show that you really have still got a reduction in turnover and need that help. That you be quite open and transparent with your landlord, and that you have the discussion sort of honestly and fairly, because what you're trying to do is you've got no legislation behind you. You're still trying to negotiate a relationship where you can both win-win. You can still run your business out of the premises, but at a reduced rate for a little while longer until you can build yourself back up again. So make sure you give them that information and the context of where you're working in. And if you are able to agree to that, then document what you've got in writing. Make sure it's in writing. It's actually a contract that you're bound to. If both of you sign it, you're bound to that, and you will need to say what the reduced rent is and when you are going to start paying it back. So if you tried that with your landlord, if you have worked out your finances and you realise you can't pay full rent, what we suggest that you do, and your landlord says, no, I'm not interested in it, then please come and contact us, because we can facilitate a mediation between both parties, and it's been very successful. We've actually got an 86% success rate for all our landlord and tenant disputes through the pandemic. Now, what's mediation? Everyone sort of talks about mediation or alternate dispute resolution. It's not like a court system. It's not like Judge Judy who'll sit there and say, you've got to do this and you've got to do this, and I don't want anyone talking or butting in about what it's going to happen. Mediation is where you're empowered. You actually have a say on what happens in the mediation, and you're involved in the settlement negotiations. So if you apply to the VSBC for mediation of your dispute, a case officer will talk to you, and then we'll talk to the other party. So if it's a rent relief request, we talk to the landlord and we ask for the relevant information. And quite often, just by talking to both of you, we'll be able to facilitate a resolution. Then if that can't happen, we'll arrange a time for a mediation. Pre-COVID, they were all done in person, but now we're all doing them via video conference or teleconference, like everything else that's happening. And I'll give you an example of what a mediation is, and this is called the orange story. So there's a dad, and he's sitting down watching the footy, and all of a sudden he hears his two sons screaming, I want the orange, no, I want the orange. And he goes up and he grabs a knife and he cuts the orange in half and gives the sons half each, and thinks, great, I can go back and watch the footy. Only for them both to burst into tears, and he said, oh, now what's the problem? And the first son says, well, it's your birthday and I wanted to make you a cake and it needed the rind of a whole orange, so now I can't make the cake. And the second son said, well, I want to make you your favourite cocktail. It needed the juice of a whole orange and it'll be way too strong if I only have half an orange, so now I can't make it. So neither son was happy. What a mediator does is they sit down and they would ask both of the sons what they need the orange for. And in this case, they would give the son the orange to rind, and then they would give it to the other son who could juice the whole orange. And both parties would be happy. And that's a bit simplistic, but that's what happens at the mediation. You both get to talk about your side of the story and come out with a resolution that's going to suit both of you. So if at the mediation, and we've got a panel of about I think we've got 52 mediators now actually, who are in the main lawyers or barristers, and so they will come up with this resolution. And let's still stay with the orange story. So what would happen is it would be written in writing, and it would be written in writing that one son is able to grind the orange and the other one is able to juice it, or this is how much rent relief we've agreed to pay, and this is how much we're going to defer, and that would be signed, and it's what we call bindings terms of settlement, or a binding contract that you actually have to abide by. And if you don't abide by it, so we've had cases where landlord and tenant have agreed to a reduction in rent, and then the tenant hasn't paid any rent after that. The landlord is entitled then to take it to court and get that agreement to be null and void because it has been broken, and also if an agreement can't be reached, the dispute will go to VCAT or the courts, and you request a certificate from us to go to VCAT and the courts. Thankfully, at the moment, as I said, 86% of our cases are being resolved at mediation. So very few are actually going through to the courts. We're finding, it's been a year now and the court's just starting, or VCAT's just starting to hear some cases about rent relief. So you will expect a delay if it does go through to VCAT. So I've been talking a lot about rent relief. For those of you who like stats, we've had over 16,000 inquiries about rent relief mainly, but people still have other questions that are related to the impact on coronavirus. We've had 4,200 applications about trying to resolve rent relief disputes. So, and we've finalised about 2,500 of those matters, over 50% of them early without the need to go to mediation, and over 100 through our free mediation service with, as I've been saying, a success rate of 86%. And it takes about 9 to 10 weeks if there's mediation to try and resolve it. So it is quite quick, it is efficient, it doesn't cost you anything at the moment. Pre-COVID, it was only $195 to come to mediation anyway, so a lot better than going to court or wearing a dispute, which is what a lot of businesses tend to do. So I've just got a scenario here now to let you know what's been happening. So this is, Jacqueline's got a cafe, it's been doing really well, but of course, and we've made this the CBD, but I don't think it actually, necessarily needs to be the CBD. It can be any area in Metro Melbourne. The cafe's turnover plummeted and Jacqueline couldn't keep paying the rent. So she negotiated rent relief with her landlord, Dan, under the scheme from January to March 2021, so for that quarter, and the scheme, the CTRS scheme, Commercial Tenancy Relief Scheme, was still in play up until the end of March. And then with workers gradually returning to the CBD, Jacqueline started finding that she had an increase in turnover of her cafe, but she'd start to struggle to pay that deferred and the full monthly rent come April. So what Jacqueline does is that she has a look at her finances and get advice from a business advisor, and then she explains her situation to Dan, and what she's asked for is a 35% rent relief from April to June, and she supplies extracts of her accounting records to show that she's still got that fall in her turnover. And Dan's response is that, he's also struggling and probably needs her to start paying the rent, and so their communication broke down, and so neither party was sort of happy. And so Jacqueline applied to us for free mediation. And then what we do is quickly get in touch with Dan to try and reopen that communication and try and facilitate a discussion. But they still couldn't reach an agreement. So what we do, in this scenario, is progress the matter to mediation, where one of our experienced mediators tries to help them to negotiate and have a look at creative ways of resolving their dispute. And what they agreed to was the monthly rent was $8,000, and that Jacqueline would receive 25%. That's $2,000, part of which wouldn't be repaid and part which would be repaid later over 12 months from the 1st of April to the 31st of June 2021. And this sort of took into account both of their financial situations. So Jacqueline didn't get the 35% she was after, got a little bit less, but still had rent relief. And that's what we're finding is happening. We've had a number of businesses that have been outside the scheme because they weren't on JobKeeper, but the landlord is still providing rent relief. And I've got this live example of what I think was a really good outcome. So this is back in June last year when we were sort of in the lockdown. And it was about a pub owner, and the landlord brought the dispute to us because we're finding that it started off to be 40%, but now 60% of the cases the landlord's bringing disputes because the tenant's just not paying rent. So this pub owner hadn't been paying any rent, and the landlord was getting pretty cross. So they came to mediation. And the mediator sat them, started off with the landlord, and the landlord, as I said, was pretty cross, and he was sort of saying, well, I don't know why you're not doing takeaway food. You just seem to have stopped doing anything, you know, and I'm not getting any rent, and I think I should be getting some rent, and that you should be doing something about it, you know, and was very, very strident. And then the tenant came on, and he's sitting in the pub in the dark with a beanie on and a jacket because it was in winter. And he said, look, I'm sorry I'm in the dark, but I've got a $15,000 electricity bill that I just cannot pay. He said, I've tried everything. He said, you know, I started doing the takeaway, but then the staff had to go off and have COVID tests and no one could do it. And he said, we're not a gastro pub anyway, we're a social pub. We're a pub where people come after work. It's the community pub. They come down for a chat to catch up on with and socialise with friends. And he said, if I could walk away now, I would. I've had it. He said, but this town needs a pub, and so I'm going to stick it out. And after the landlord heard that, he actually, his whole mindset changed. He actually said, yes, we've got to keep this pub going. He actually realised that, you know, he needed the tenant and the tenant needed him. And so they agreed, that the landlord agreed to 80% rent relief. And he said at the end of it, I'm going to kick in $15,000 so you can pay that electricity bill. And I think that's a great story, because the pub owner didn't have job keeper. He wasn't on job keeper. For whatever reason, but the landlord and tenant still realised it was beneficial to have a reduced rent and keep that business going. And that's what we're hearing over and over again, that this business relationship still needs to work. And through having an independent person such as the VSB come in can actually help those businesses to keep going. And that's what we need, as many businesses as can possibly keep going through this pandemic as possible. I've got a couple of questions here that I always get asked, so I thought I'd put them in the slideshow. Can a tenant be evicted for not paying rent? And yes, they can be. So if you've damaged property or you've got unpaid rent from before March the 20th, 20, so before the pandemic you had unpaid rent, or you're starting to accumulate unpaid rent now, so you're not paying any rent after the 28th of March, you can be evicted. So as I said before, it's really important to pay the rent that you can and talk to your landlord. And that's what we're trying to facilitate. If agreement breaks down, I think I've already spoken about this one, is that you are, if you've reached an agreement and the terms of settlement are signed, it's a binding document and can be enforced. So again, if you've reached an agreement and then you're finding you still can't pay rent, you need to either contact us to get back in touch with the landlord or talk to the landlord directly. And unfortunately, we are finding that there are businesses who've done the sums and just cannot, they're not going to be viable, or some who have found that they've gone online and that's working really well and they don't need a physical premise anymore. We've got a lot of questions about exiting the lease. So if you do want to exit the lease, you are entitled, the tenant is obliged to pay rent until the end of the lease. So if you've still got, 2 or 3 years running on your lease, that's a lot of payments that you've got to make if you need to close your business. So you need to seek your landlord's agreement. So the landlord might want to get the premises back early, or might be willing to negotiate a surrender fee. So you might agree to pay X amount and forego on that lease. And we are finding that a lot of some of the actual mediations that come about rent relief end up being the business owner saying, look, I just don't think I can keep going, and we have been able to facilitate a lease, the end of lease. So again, if you're in that situation, then please come to us and we can try and help support you on that. I spoke a bit about closing your business, and unfortunately at the moment we are finding businesses that are having to close because they just cannot keep going. And some of the warning signs, you might not have come to terms with the fact that you need to close your business. Some of the warning signs that you might be finding is that your profits are falling, or you're struggling to pay those debts on time, or you're having difficulty accessing new finances from your lender. So you might have a bank loan, and they sort of say, oh no, we're not going to increase that anymore, you're at your limit. Or you might be falling behind with your BAS lodgements, or keep putting off doing your actual bookkeeping or record keeping because you know it's just not going to look pretty. If that's happening, then please talk to your accountant or bookkeeper or business advisor about what you should do. And then there's some critical signs that we're talking about, and we've done this in conjunction with CPA Australia, is that if you're finding that your suppliers are demanding to be paid in cash when previously they'd taken on credit, or they're refusing to sell to you, then you know you're in problem. Or if you're suddenly thinking, oh look, I'm going to go to one of those, buy now, pay later, or seek finance from less reputable sources, that you can't pay your staff or your rent on time, or you're using the GST or super contributions to help pay your debts. They're critical signs that you're really, really in trouble. And what you're better off doing, it's kind of like a Band-Aid, you're better off actually talking to your accountant about what you should do and whether you should close early, because the longer you leave it, the more and more your debts stack up. And again, we've got lots of resources on our website to help and support those. And I know that's, a lot of people don't like talking about this sort of negative stuff, but for some people you are in that situation, and it's probably better to talk to us or talk to again your accountant or someone. And of course, if you are feeling stressed or overwhelmed, then the Victorian government has set up what they're calling Partners in Wellbeing Helpline. So it's free mental health and financial counselling, and it's available till 10 o'clock at night on weekdays, and it's also open from 9 till 5 on weekends. And there's a number there, 1300 375 330. And how that's different, a lot of times we say, talk to Beyond Blue, but these Partners in Wellbeing have been skilled in what it's like to run a business. So if you've got mental health issues and you're running a business, it in some instances it can be harder because you've still got to try and run that business. You can't take time out of the business to sort of get yourself better. You've still always got that business there, and you might be supporting your staff and your family, and quite often you'll come last in that. But you need to put yourself first, because if you're not on top of your game, your business is going to suffer as well. So again, please contact the Partners in Wellbeing, who'll be able to help you, and they've also got financial counsellors there as well. We've also got rent relief guidance in Arabic, Vietnamese and simplified Chinese for those who need it, and anyone who comes to our anyone who rings up, and they can request an interpreter for guidance, and anyone who comes to our mediation can have a free interpreter in any language that they require. And I think that is about all. So I am going to now try and minimize this, and I think I've unshared. Am I back to? Yep, great. All right.
Okay, thank you so much, Judy. So I've downloaded a few questions from the application form from our guests. So I've got 3 questions. One of them is quite long, simply because it's setting the tone of the situation. This is an accountant, and his question is, What is the VSBC's view of a tenant who hasn't followed the rental relief request by the book? As an accountant, in my opinion, those rules were designed to protect tenants, but in speaking to the landlords prior to mediation, they are denying relief applications based on the finer details of the rule book. For example, during early negotiations, a landlord gave a client of mine relief until the end of December. The client was confused about a detail, so brought it to my attention. When the landlord was corrected on a detail, the landlord took the offer off the table and accused the tenant of not applying in the correct manner, using the fine details of the rules against the applicant. My concern is if the rules are taken too literally, many tenants are penalised. How does the VSBC mediate these rules for tenants and landlords?
Yeah, it's an interesting point because it is quite prescriptive about the information that a tenant needs to provide, and we do know that some tenants hadn't got all of the information together. We tried to mitigate that by having a draft letter that the tenant that was on our website that tenants could actually send to their landlord, and that helped alleviate some of that. But as I've been explaining, the legislation was there as the backdrop. So when you're mediating, you can decide, the landlord and tenant can decide whatever they like. They draw on the legislation when they can't come up with a decision themselves. And what we found at mediation is that when both parties start talking about what they can and they can't afford, that they would resolve that regardless of the tenant having not dotted and crossed every I and T. And, you know, as I said, we've got an 86% success rate. So some of them where the tenant hasn't done exactly the right thing and the landlord's just said, no, I'm not going to provide any rent relief. They've gone off to VCAT, and we'll wait and see what VCAT says about those cases. But in the majority, the landlord and the tenant have been able to facilitate rent relief regardless of the tenant not actually following very prescriptive requirements.
The second question is, can a landlord, I think this is relating to just general inquiry, so can a landlord refuse to accept a prospective tenant to take over a current lease? Under what grounds can they reject?
Yes, they can reject a tenant. So I assume that the situation is that a tenant is in there and they want to on-sell the business to another tenant. And the landlord has to accept that. Now, in the vast majority of cases, they will accept that, but if they feel that the financials of the new tenant doesn't align, then they can not accept it. Yeah, that's within the law.
One last question. To those watching, please do type in your questions. We'll have a look at them and publish them. So the last question we have currently is, what if a tenant doesn't apply in time according to the rule that you can only get relief from the date of a correct application? Some tenants, because they've been away or closed during certain holiday periods, have missed out on rent relief. The strictness of no relief versus application date has meant tenants are suffering unnecessary hardship. During mediation, how can the VSBC resolve this issue?
Yes, unfortunately that did happen, and again at mediation, quite often the landlord and the tenant can negotiate whatever they like within mediation. So whilst on paper it might, you know, they might not have put their rent relief request in, in January, they might not have put it in until the middle of January, and so technically they're not entitled to rent relief for that first half of January. At mediation, again, they can negotiate with the landlord about having rent relief during that period as well. And quite often, as I've said before, they'll come to some, pragmatic arrangement.
Great. Well, there are no more questions, so I'm happy to wrap up. So thank you so much, Commissioner O'Connell, for hosting this and giving us the advice that you have. To those viewing this recording, please have a browse of our other business webinar videos on the City of Whittlesea YouTube channel, or reach out to us at business@whittlesea.vic.gov.au or call us on 9217 2278. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and good luck with your businesses.
And we're clear.